You are now entering the MxU Podcast. No credentials required.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 47 of the MxU Podcast. I'm your host, and so is Jeff. And actually, so should Robert. He should just be a host because...
Yeah, I think so. He's been... He is now the record holder for the most appearances as a guest on the MxU Podcast. Might as well be a co-host. I mean...
Well, I think what that means more than anything is I need some work. I need a job. I got too much free time on my hands right now. That's what that means.
I know that's not true because for anybody who's been paying attention... between the labs that you're hosting as webinars and then all the Avid stuff that's coming down the pike, I know that you've been slammed busy.
Yeah, man.
So
yeah,
may not be mixing, but you've been working.
That's true. That is very true. It has been a very, very busy time, especially here lately, man. Whew. Crushing.
We've said it before, but it's such a weird thing, too, for some people in our industry to be extremely busy and some to not.
Yeah.
It's a strange days.
Well, I mean, and not to rub noses in it, but I mean, I feel really, really fortunate to be working with Avid. Otherwise,
yeah.
I mean, if I was relying totally on touring income right now, I would be hurting,
Right.
absolutely hurting. So, yeah, I feel very, very fortunate to have that work.
But on the flip side, like we mentioned before we hit record, what a blessing in disguise this has been for education, with,
Yeah.
Certainly with what we do, but even guys like yourself and Pooch and Raybold, what those guys are doing, there's just so much more options for education out there now, but I feel like everyone's also now participating too.
Yeah, the engagement is the encouraging thing, right? I mean, and it really kind of shows you, I think, something that at least I feel like I've known for a long time and tried to get across to people. And I think you guys know this just from being motivated to put together MxU, is that there is an incredible thirst for knowledge and insight into how we do this stuff. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that really want to know it and understand it,
Yeah.
So, now that we got this downtime, I mean, it's just fed that whole appetite. And of course, during the downtime, which started in the first quarter of this year, of course, everybody became a teacher, everybody's a teacher now and got their own thing, trying to, show how they do it and what they're doing, et cetera. I think back on like when I was coming into this, as a, 18, 19-year-old kid, what I had to go through to even find one scintilla of information about this, I'll call it an art form, about this art form, about what we kind of do in this business. I mean, it was almost impossible. And now we are at the complete other end of that. I mean, the amount of information at your fingertips, you could never even see it or read it all in a lifetime. You couldn't do it.
No, you couldn't. And like you said, there's an appetite for it. But I also think because of how fast technology's moved, there's also some evidence of people that don't understand what's actually going on under the hood.
There's a whole lot of that for sure.
Yeah.
And that's a big reason we specifically said, hey, let's get Robert back on here to talk about gain structure. Because in one of your labs, you go real deep into gain structure, deeper than I've ever been, certainly. Yeah. So, that was like an hour and 50-minute YouTube video that everyone should go check out. And if they haven't seen any of your labs, just go to YouTube and subscribe to Robert Scovill's channel.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of stuff there. But should we just dive right in? I actually have a bunch of questions related to that video.
Well, we can. I would just say, it wasn't like that lab just grew out of a weekend and do it. I mean, that's stuff that I have been kind of, researching and refining. I mean, there are videos, kind of, phone videos of me giving that presentation years ago,
Yeah.
And I just kind of added to it and refined it over time. Like I've added the component of, sound quality, how do I get analog sound quality? How do we do this with plugins? What does metering mean in a plugin? I mean, all those kind of things play right into that gain structure thing because, poor gain structure is how we got some of the analog sound.
Right.
That's true. Yeah. You can't get harmonic distortion and tape saturation without a little too much gain sometimes.
Yeah. But the point being, you can't get that in a digital console period.
Right.
Right. You
Right.
have to go outside the bounds of that to get it. So
Right. Digital zero is bad. And so,
it is a brick
going
wall.
over the zero on those VU meters and analog gear is one thing, but you go over zero in digital and you're not going to like the results.
Yeah. Unless you're Trent Reznor. I mean, Trent likes it. So that's cool. I'm okay with that.
Well, that's one of the things I wrote down. Because you said clipping in digital is muting.
What is? It's not, there is no clipping of a waveform per se. It's just running out of bit math and just goes mute. Sorry, got no more math.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just
There's only so many zeros and ones that you can accommodate.
I mean,
and
that's
then
the end
after
of that full
point,
scale, right? So, yeah.
Right.
So, it's, I mean, it happens so quickly that we don't, we interpret it as distortion, which it is. I mean, it's distorting, but it's not clipping of a waveform as we traditionally know it in analog, right? The squaring off of a waveform.
Yeah. The other interesting thing to me was the realization that true 24-bit resolution doesn't happen until that point. When we're looking at line level as our kind of goal for just here's where we're going to set the gain per input, that we're not at 24 bits at that point, but we need to get to that point or a little more to be able to even get to 20 or 21 bits because of, just wanting to take advantage of as much of that resolution as we can.
Yeah. And in full transparency, I would tell you this, that there is some debate about that among A to D designers versus the golden ears of our business. I mean, the golden ears unquestionably say, look, higher bit depth, higher bit resolution, that sounds better. But I've had A to D converter manufacturers tell me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's going to sound the same regardless of where you're at. But, the thing that I try to get across in the lab is that may be true if we look at the converter in isolation, okay? Even if you want to say, okay, the bit depth stuff, that's crap. I don't care about that. But here's the thing that is absolutely fact. There is a preamp, an analog preamp, correlated to that A to D converter.
Right.
Right? And there is going to be a sweet spot of that preamp at line level and around it, right? Maybe just above it to try to get some harmonics into it. And that is correlated to that bit depth.
Right.
So, you can't just say, well, it doesn't matter in A to D conversion. It's going to sound the same everywhere because there's a preamp before
there's
it.
a preamp involved.
Right.
That's
so
great.
Those two things are correlated. You can't just look at them in isolation,
And do you feel like there's any debate in whether a preamp has a sweet spot?
I don't think there's any debate of that. I mean, you could easily prove that, right?
Right.
And the sweet spot of a preamp is going to be the sweet spot of just about kind of any electronic circuit. It's going to be optimized at a certain level, right? There's going to be a certain amount of signal level where the signal to noise specs, the harmonic specs, all of those specs are going to be at their best, right?
Yep.
That's certainly not at the low end of the scale. That's where all signal to noise, comes into play in analog, regardless of whether it's a preamp or any circuit.
Right. And
then above it, there's going to be a place where we get harmonic addition, harmonic plume is what I call it. And then to the point of saturation, right? And anywhere in between, somewhere in between there is going to be the sweet spot for the pre where you go, yeah, that's really, really working right now. Maybe if we go a little bit above it, we start to get some harmonics in it. Now it starts to take on the character of a preamp, right? You follow me there?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, interesting.
So do you feel like there's digital platforms or digital environments where, like I'm thinking about like a Midas console. Everybody wants to run those, put those drums in the red. It sounds great. But on analog, yeah, sure. That's what we just talked about. But on digital, the preamp that may be true of, but would you ever run a digital preamp a little hotter, even though you're getting closer to digital clip? Or would you just go, let's just keep it all playing safe at line level?
No, that's situational. You have to analyze the signal in and of itself. And, what you just described there is actually why I think doing drums in particular in the digital world is so difficult.
Yeah.
Because there is a huge disparity between the peak information in it and the RMS information in it.
Because of all the transients.
Yeah. I mean, it's easily, on a snare drum, I mean, especially one that's tuned up and maybe a little bit bright, you might have 15, 18 dB of difference between the RMS and the peak.
Right.
So that keeps you like in digital, because we can't get above that 0 point, right? That keeps you from overdriving that preamp like we would normally do in analog. We might let those peaks go well past the clip point, because what happens in analog is as you start to saturate there a little bit, right? That peak starts to shave off a little bit, right? And it starts to sound a little fatter. Well, by the time we get to that point in digital, we're already past digital over.
Yep.
You follow me there?
Yep.
I mean, honestly, that's why I think drums are so difficult, are so challenging to do in analog. And I mean, you could make a good argument for it. I don't think we'll see it anytime soon, but I think we may see this at some point in the future. Because keep in mind, that analog pre is the only analog circuit in the entire console. It's the only place where you could grab any organically grown harmonic, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So you could make a good argument, and I think I do this. I know I did this in the lab, where you put another gain stage after the preamp, the converter, right? So I can run up the preamp and get the harmonic, and then turn it down into the converter.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. And that's in that lab. If you look at it, I think I'm using a Neve, maybe it might even be a Neve knockoff into a standalone converter to show that, yeah, look, I can drive this all the way up and get all this harmonic information and then back it off to keep, keep the gain or the conversion process in play, right? And keep it safe. Matter of fact, it gets easier at that point because now the distortion in the pre has kind of crunched the signal a little bit, and you could get it higher into the converter if you needed to do it. But things like a vocal, maybe a keyboard, things like that, would I run those a little hotter than line level? Sure, if I can get away with it, I might do that. Depends on what it does downstream for me gain structure-wise, because it's not just about preamp into converter. Remember, there's other processing coming later where, you want to pay attention there as well. If you get significantly out of that line level stage at the very beginning, then things can kind of tumble out of control as you get farther down the console if you're not careful.
That's great. So a lot of our tribe and a lot of our maybe volunteers in churches, they're starting to sort of understand what this means, but their context for it is only in terms of how does this input gain impact what happens at my faders. And so I feel like we need to back up a few steps to just sort of clarify some of the foundational principles. The difference, really the purpose of gain is to get mic level to line level in the first place.
Correct.
Right? That gain knob on your console is really just to add voltage to the signal to get mic level to line level in the first place. And then the fader, I love when you said it at the very beginning of the lab, the fader is mostly an attenuator.
Yeah. It is all an attenuator.
Yeah. I mean, because the amount of throw that you have on your fader to get line level hotter is pretty limited. And so, we answer this question all the time. So maybe we just need to review, like, once I'm at line level and my fader resolution is, jacked up because I can only get my fader so high because the signal's so hot. Like, how do you talk to people about addressing that? Because I really think people care about fader resolution so that small fader moves don't have a drastic effect on the output level.
Right.
But then, how do you maintain high fader resolution with appropriate input gain?
Yeah. And I think to properly respect that, you have to kind of dive into realizing how challenging live sound is to do. Okay. Because this kind of thing, the studio handles this much easier than we handle it in live sound. In the studio, you're working on one song at a time. Okay.
Right.
Yep.
So you could print really hot. And then when you're getting ready to mix that and it comes back into the return path, you just trim the return path down to get your fader into high resolution.
Yeah.
Right? Simple, easy. But if they had to do that song over song over song over song, how would they manage that?
In real time.
In real time. In real time.
Yeah.
You're not just going to go over to 18 or 24 drum channels and go trim all of those down to get a little more gain to the mix on that. There has to be some mechanism there to do that in real time. And for my money, that's always been an audio subgroup, not a VCA,
Yep. Good.
an audio subgroup. And I think I said this in the lab as well. That is the workflow that I was taught the very first time I ever sat down at a mixer. I was a little Kelsey 16-channel mixer, 2 subgroups to the master. And you just broke it up into vocals and music, and it was like, that was the way to get your fader system optimized, right? Because it becomes volume control for those components into the PA system. And into the mix bus, really, as much as anything.
Yeah.
And you're not necessarily mixing with those subgroups. You're just using them as volume sets.
Right. I think a lot of us do that. The challenge, obviously, is like if you're mixing in-ears and front of house on the same console and you start running out of groups, and then everybody goes, well, that's what I use the digital trim for. But then I feel like, well, where is that digital trim in the signal chain? Because that matters big time.
Yeah, and from what I understand, most of the discrete digital trims in the consoles that offer a discrete digital trim, meaning it's not correlated to the preamp in some way like we do with the Avid console. My instincts tell me that is probably right after the converter in most of those consoles.
Yeah,
which is ironic, given what we just talked about, because I think the people that I ask, it's like, well, how do you use that digital trim? What do you use it for? I use it to get more input gain. And it's like, well, hang on a second.
Right.
If that's after the converter, how is that working?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I get that workflow. So in terms of just getting the fader back up to a good working resolution, sure, I'll buy that. You want to do that? Okay, sure. But it becomes hard to manage over time. You don't have any quick adjustment of multiple channels of that. And that's what the audio subgroup gives you,
No, and then, if you're trimming something like a guitar keyboard's 25 dB, but that trim is before all of your auxes, then that's changing the resolution of the auxes also, because those aren't linear either.
Well, that's true. But if those auxes are pre-fader, right, and you've made that trim to get your input fader at high resolution, then those auxes are going to be at good resolution as well.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right?
Yeah, you're right.
If it's post-fader workflow from your front of house, then you definitely want to do that and get your input faders at higher resolution, and then the other auxes will follow, right? But if you've got to have that input fader down at minus 20, let's say, and then get that gain back in an auxiliary that you're feeding to monitors, that's troublesome. It's troublesome.
For sure. Could you see a scenario where a flexible digital trim throughout the signal chain could be helpful?
No.
Okay, tell me why.
Because this is going to sound self-serving. If you just set the gain right in the first place, you shouldn't need it.
Yeah, okay.
That to me is like, okay, well, we've got this gaping head wound up at the input stage, and we're just going to put a whole bunch of Band-Aids on it by the time we get it to the output stage, and try to make it feel good. Just get it. That's kind of the premise that I start with that when I give that presentation is, how can something that is so simple, seemingly so simple to do, be so fraught with danger and different ways to do it? I mean, I say it all the time. Ask 10 engineers how they set input gain. You're going to get 15 different answers. Right. And it's like, all I got to do is get the mic to line level. All the work I want to do is after that. Why is it so hard to set that guy?
That's funny. So one of your opening questions in that presentation was, where did 0 dB go?
Yeah.
Like, how did we even get to this point? You have a slide in there where you've got 6 different faders set up, and they're all labeled the different types of metering we may see in a digital platform. You put the same source through all 6.
Yeah.
And all of the numbers on the scale are different, but then where the meter is also different, but it's the same output coming from each one of those.
But the punchline of that segment of the presentation is, okay, let's examine this closely, because each one of these meters, even though they look very different, are telling us exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the way we interpret the scale and we interpret the ballistics of the meter. Like, you've got to know what you're looking at, or you're going to make horrible mistakes here. Horrible mistakes.
Yeah, because you could just see it and go, oh, that looks low, and just go ahead and I'll give it 6 more.
Look, that's, people did that all the time in VU.
Yeah.
all the time in VU because a VU meter ballistic shaves off a lot of peak information. You don't see that peak information in that VU. And if you see guys, getting RMS level of a VU meter all the way up to the 0 point, I mean, chances are it's really saturating somewhere, especially for things like drums. But again, we could get away with that in analog. There was an element of that in analog where you kind of go,
Right.
regression. I like it,
But a VU meter on a plugin is still digital.
It's still digital.
So there's one bit on the 1176, which I have on every vocal. Yeah. And let me tell you how many times I've turned that metering away from gain reduction. 0. Never once have I hit that +4 or +8 button, partly because I didn't know what the hell they did.
Yeah, well, that one's tripped up more people than probably anything on this planet, given, that +4 is kind of an audio standard, +8's a broadcast standard. You're just changing the metering standard there,
Yeah, I just go, the output is how I'm going to trim my output stage. Like, that's a little too hot. Let me back that down, or let me turn that up. That thing could be clipping for all I know.
It probably was,
So let's park there for a minute. Let's give some good advice. What should people be doing if they understand the metering of their input indicator on their channel strip or their fader? How does that correlate with plug-in metering? First, is there a standard? Second, if there's not, then how should guys decipher how that metering should look and what they're actually seeing in the plugin?
Yeah, I think
because if it's different on every plugin, that's going to be real frustrating. So,
and it's not necessarily different on every plugin. To me, the place where it is challenged and it can fall down very quickly is when you have a plugin that is existing in the digital domain and they're trying to use an analog scaled meter there.
Yeah,
that's where it kind of falls down for me. And if you'll notice, like if you look at it over time, way more plugins now are using a DBFS meter in their plugins.
Yeah.
Because it's the only thing that's really accurate there to tell you really what's going on. The rest is just, is that 1176? No, that's a picture of 1176.
Yeah.
Right. So,
right.
So, the 1176, I think, was the most interesting one. And it's why I did it intently in that presentation, because if you remember right, if you get line level going into the plugin, the meter is sitting and just bouncing at about -20 on the VU, which would indicate to me that 0 on the VU is full scale.
Yep.
Well, what's happening at +1, +2, +3?
Right.
If it's in the digital domain, I don't know. I mean, I haven't gone in to examine it. Maybe we'll do one lab on the 1176 meter. I don't know. But, that was one of those things where, and I swear to you, I mean, I sympathize with you, Lee, because when I first started using that plugin, I remember thinking, 1176, I know this like the back of my hand. Let me use that. And I'm sure I was just screwing the pooch more times than I ever got it right, Until I kind of got in the studio and went, now wait a minute, hang on a second. let me go get the real one for a second. Hang on, let me just do a couple things here.
And the good news is, as I was watching that, I was doing Command F in the Yamaha user manual, searching for things like meter, -18, -20. And, when you search for dB in the 1,000 page Rivage manual, it gives you about 250 entries, but they're all from the word standby, not dB.
Oh my gosh.
So that was fun.
Whoever said search engines are a good idea. I'm not so certain.
What I love, though, about the presentation is that the slide that you used from Yamaha to indicate that their 0 is -20 and that it is the point at which green turns to yellow on the meter was from the LS9 manual.
Yes.
It wasn't from their flagship console. It was from an LS9. It was like, finally, we get clarity from Yamaha because we know exactly what this is doing. It's just, that was funny to me.
I mean, I ask people all the time, what's line level on the meter? Well, on Yamaha, it's -14. Well, on Yamaha, it's -18. Well, on Digico, it's -16. It's like, hey, guys, there's only one answer here. So,
Well, and I heard you say that, and then I went and looked, and I cannot find in the Rivage manual, again, look, it's 1,000 pages, and there's another 400 page one on how to set it up. Like, there's loads of documents. I need to probably cut them some slack. But the one thing I did find on that one, the green changes to yellow at minus 18. So does it change from console to console with them? I don't know. I'm going to have to ask them to find out.
Well, yeah, but if you look at even on that LS9, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't show minus 20.
Oh.
It shows 22 and 18.
Right. The indicators are 22 and 18.
Yeah.
Okay. So it could be minus 20.
Yeah, I would bet that it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, what I was saying before, when I was not Googling, when I was Command Fing DB, I did find a section on.
Did you say effing DB?
Yes,
He did.
they are.
I was going to go there.
Yes, and that's the title of this podcast.
Yeah, Command effing DB.
It has a meter section for insert points in and out.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that's good. But it's just 3 lights. It's green, yellow, and red.
Yeah.
So it tells you if it's green, it's less than or equal to 18. If it's yellow, it's greater than or equal to 18. And if it's red, it's 0.
Yeah.
So I'm like, make up your damn mind, guys. Like, is it minus 18? Like, let's all be the same. So,
Well, I mean, you could look. You can just take a tone generator and
right.
put it into an input and sort this out. I mean, you should be able to. That's one of those. I mean, that's where digital is kind of cool because it makes it very simple. Take that tone, put it in at minus 20, and it should be that if you put a fader at 0 and a master fader at 0, it better be minus 20 at the end.
Yeah.
That's what I love. Your comment in the lab that bit math doesn't lie.
It does not.
Yeah, that's true in the digital domain, especially. It's like if you know the reference signal level, it's not going to lie.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, it doesn't get lost.
We a few episodes ago we had Kyle Hamilton on, and we're asking him about gain structure, and his response was, "I leave no bits on the table." Like, that is really good.
I like that approach.
That is good. Okay, I'm going to go back to this digital trim thing.
Okay.
So, using an external preamp, then being able to attenuate that level into the converter, is there an argument then that we should have the option to trim between the preamp and the converter?
I think, I mean, honestly, I think you can make that argument. It just becomes, I mean, look, and I think I said this in the lab, we have trouble setting one knob right now, right? Do we really want to put an entire additional gain structure between the preamp and the converter to get us into the console now?
Right.
I mean, let's just sit with it as it is for a while and see if we can get this part sorted out, and then maybe do that. Because then and I'll fly this flag because I'm so passionate about it. Then that starts to make virtual sound check really challenging to do. In terms of setting gain, in terms of setting track gain, because now you're just setting trim level on playback. You're not impacting drive of the preamp now.
Right.
So that can get a little squirrely. But if you're willing to concede that piece of it, then yeah, sure, I can see where you could make an argument for that for sure.
Yeah, won't be showing up on a venue is what you're saying.
Well, no, I'm saying maybe you just have to concede it. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, we do a similar thing. Like in this latest version of software release, we have heat on every channel now, which is preamp distortion or tape. I shouldn't say distortion, preamp drive or tape drive on every input channel now. So, it's trying to emulate that. And we always kind of took the approach of, in our design of, we want to have the cleanest possible colorless preamp stage possible, but we're going to give you the most options to be able to harmonically enhance that signal in the digital domain. So if you want to do preamp emulation, you do it right after the converter. If you want to do tape emulation, any of those kind of things, you can do it anywhere in the path. But this is kind of the analog mindset. If we put a really colorful preamp out there, hang it off of the front end of the converter, then that's a one-trick pony. Everybody's got that color at that point.
Yeah.
That's the analog mindset. I mean, I've said that before too. I can take analog, and it's a one-trick pony. Everything is analog. I can't make it sound more digital. I can take digital and make it sound more analog than analog at times. So,
right. I was, again, watching that presentation, just how complex and simple all this is.
Yeah.
It's simple, but it's very, very complex. I thought, is there a possibility of having what auto driving is going to do for people? we'll look back in 20 years and think, can you believe we ever drove cars? Do you think, is there a 20 years from now, 50 years from now, can you believe we used those old types of microphones that needed extra voltage to get converted to digital before we were able to mix them?
That part of it is, I think, very far off on the horizon.
I kind of hope that doesn't happen, by the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can't just shove to the side the fact that there's art involved here.
Right.
There's interpretation
Right.
and art. I mean, look, I love looking at things in this way. It was kind of the way I was taught to do it in physics in college. Go the other direction. Let the AI happen first. Allow it to do all the audio decisions and make the music that we've heard for 50 or 60 years. What do you think it sounds like?
Blah.
Yeah.
Lifeless.
Right.
No emotion.
Well, I mean, there's no accidents in it.
Right.
No happy accidents.
Right.
Because a lot of, and let's just stay in the realms of music here, a lot of things that we've grown to love about the sound of music were happy accidents.
That's true.
And the box ain't going to make happy accidents. Even though I heard Gene Remedy from IBM talking about this, because they were talking about, I think I actually wrote an article on this once, having AI do this kind of work, this kind of editing work in film, right? And she was asked, can you teach it creativity? And she said, oh, absolutely, we can. And I remember thinking, okay, now hang on a second. All right. I mean, now we're going to get to a point where we seriously talk about thinking outside the box. Because then for the human to be creative, what you have to do is anything that the AI doesn't do. Right?
Wow.
You follow me there?
Yeah, I do.
I mean, if the AI is this programmed creativity, then creativity of the human demands, I've got to do anything but that. It was a fascinating thing she did on, this has got to be a good couple of years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago now.
Yeah.
Where she was talking about they're using AI now to create movie trailers.
Wow.
Right. And it was considered, before this was starting to happen, people who could put together effective movie trailers were some of the most highly coveted people in the music or the movie industry. Right. Because what they had to do was put together the essence of the movie in about, 2 minutes, and it had to target the right demographic. Right. All of that.
And tell the story, but not tell the whole story.
Entice
Don't give
the
it
story
away.
without giving it away. Right.
Yeah.
And it would take, they would work on these trailers for weeks, months, tons of time. Whereas in AI, you can have it do the analysis of the story, put in emphasis points, tell it the demographic you're going after, and it can get it done in about a day.
Wow.
That was her claim of it. So but it's one of those things where, as the music guy, I started thinking, well, that absolutely applies to music.
Yeah.
Absolutely applies. You can have AI mix your music. Okay, these are the inputs. This is the style of music we want. This is the demographic we're going after. Okay, AI, go get it. Go tell us what we need to do there. Could I see that happening? I absolutely could see that happening. You think record labels wouldn't want that?
Oh, of course they would.
They absolutely would want
Yeah.
I get an album mix with no revisions.
that. Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Just for fun, one time a few months ago, I messed with eMastered, which is the sort of online AI based mastering tool. And when I got it goes through the process, and it's like a 3-minute analysis, and then it spits back what it thinks is the mix you're going for. And my first response was, I kind of see what you're doing. Like, I know what you think you're supposed to be doing, but man, this just doesn't sound very good at all, much less very artistic.
Right.
So I agree with you. The art of it is something that we have to preserve, I think, at all costs.
Music is the best harbinger of this, right? I mean, how many times do we have to see this happen in music? As soon as a style of music becomes predictable, we go completely the other direction.
It's out.
Right.
It's out. Let's go somewhere else now, So, how would something like AI deal with that? I mean, I don't know. That's above my pay grade. Maybe they're thinking that way. I don't know. But it sure seems like that's the human surviving there, saying, that's what the machine says to do. That's not what I'm doing. Sorry.
Right.
Okay, circle back to microphones. I wrote this down too.
How did we get there?
I don't know. I
Man,
could talk all day about
we
AI.
went for a long boat ride there. Holy cow.
When we're talking about digital audio sources, so wireless mic with Dante built in, for example, or do we need to think any differently when it comes to sources that we're not using a preamp at all?
There's a preamp somewhere.
That's a good point.
Unless it's a digital microphone.
Right.
I mean, how many times have you seen guys do this? Let's go out of the digital domain for a second. Take a wireless microphone receiver and put it in line level.
Yep.
And bring it into a microphone input.
All the time.
Right. Why do they do that?
Oh, it sounds better, or it's got the signal's better.
Yeah. Which it's not. It's not you're cramming a big signal into a mic pre and going to pat it all the way down and try to get it to work. You'd be much, much better off there putting that device in mic level, bringing it in to a mic level input, and then working on the output of the microphone in transmission to get it to the right level to the receiver, because it's going to broadcast better, it's going to compand better, blah, blah. It's another version of gain structure there.
Okay, so we have a lot of people who use a lot of wireless mics now who need to rewind for about 30 seconds and listen to all that again.
Yeah.
So mic level output from your
receiver
into
a mic
input. The rest of the
I mean, if you're gonna go line level out of your receiver, then come into a line input on the console.
Right.
Which may just be, if it doesn't have a discrete line input, you may just need to pad it down and bring it in. That's fine. I'm just saying, make sure it's line level.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even
that's good.
Like some of the mics now, you can just patch right into your Dante network.
Right. But again, you want to pay attention to gain structure there, because obviously there's an analog piece to that and a digital conversion piece to that. And how much of it you have control of, I have no idea sitting here.
Right.
So again, you've got to pay attention to transmission at that point. You're still going to be able to trim that thing coming into the console. You shouldn't need to do very much to it. Honestly,
Right.
I mean, that's part of the reason for going through all that hassle of getting it to Dante or whatever your network protocol is. But remember, there's a converter involved there. So
what's the original reason or the right reason to attenuate plus or minus on the transmitter receivers?
Because you want to get a sufficient enough signal to broadcast it properly, right?
Okay.
Right. You want to have enough output on because there's compansion that takes place there with fixed threshold, right?
Okay.
You don't have the ability to adjust that companding that's going on there, and it's based on a broadcast level, right? A projected broadcast level. So the worst situation for this, I'll give you the worst example of this. Make the output of the receiver really hot and turn down the sensitivity on the wireless transmitter very far to get the signal to be the right level at the console. That's the worst of all situations there. Not going to transmit correctly, not going to compand correctly, et cetera. You've got to pay attention to that broadcast piece of the spectrum there in terms of level.
Because the transmission level needs to be pretty high.
Well, it needs to be high without overmodulating it.
Right.
You don't want to undermodulate either. There's a right, I hate to say it, there's a right way. I'm sure it's in the Yamaha manual, isn't it?
Robert, I have found that every console manufacturer puts all the information you need right in the manual.
Well, I'm going to take that one step further, Lee, because I don't know if you know this, but in MxU software, all of the documentation for the console and the system is on the console now.
Oh, that's great.
You actually have a help tab on the console with all of that information.
Speaking of Venue 7, we should talk
Yeah,
about
I
we
did.
need to-
I
we need
spoke
to-
of it. Yes.
We need to go down that rabbit trail for a few minutes.
So I've heard from someone that it's the largest software release in Venue history for sure, maybe even Avid's.
That is accurate. It is an enormous software release. If you guys that are listening haven't been following, it's going to take us. We just added another webinar to the series, so it's going to be a 6-webinar series just to cover the software features that have been added in the console. So it's
Not total software, just the new features.
just the new features. Just the new features. So probably 6 hours plus of talking about that stuff. Yeah, it's
And
huge.
maybe one of the larger additions is the change to delay compensation.
Yeah, the addition of really, for all intents and purposes, I'll say comprehensive delay compensation. Nothing in digital, especially nothing in digital live sound, is going to be 100% comprehensive. Where it doesn't matter where you route, how you route, it's going to compensate for it. There's some guidelines and some rules for the routing, but boy, it covers just about everything I can think of for certainly for music mixing. That is for sure.
What's the headline there? What's a couple of the biggest additions?
The huge changes are for starters, which we just recently released, but this is in support of it, the ability to have the system on StarPoint connection, right? Where you can use a Luminex network switch and you don't have to create these redundant loops anymore. It's just primary and redundant connection, just plug in your devices, right? Which makes it much, much simpler. But the thing that leads to that is that we also now support 3 systems, input sharing and gain tracking via those switches. So you can just plug in 3 control surfaces, 3 engines, plug in your I/O, and those 3 systems are now sharing inputs and gain tracking. So that's a big
So for people
deal.
who in church world, for people who aren't aware, one of the, I don't want to say limitations, but one of the maybe factors for some people in choosing or not choosing S6L was that they weren't able to have a console in front of house monitors and broadcast all linked together, but now you can.
Yeah, you can. And the cool thing about using the switches, I got to be careful how I say this, but it leads you open to how many consoles do you want to put on there? I
Right.
mean, certainly there'll be a limitation at some point, but it certainly could be more than 3. I think we could probably qualify up to 5, 6, something like that if we wanted to do it pretty easily. So just a matter of building the test grids and making sure it does. We'll start with 3 and see how it goes with that.
And then what we got in Pro Tools a few years ago with Heat, now that's on Venue.
Heat on every channel now, or every input channel, I should say now. So you have the ability to put tape emulation or preamp emulation, like a tube style preamp emulation on every input channel. And the cool thing about that is even compared to, I think Yamaha does a similar thing with Silk, right?
Yeah.
But that is part of the analog process in their situation. This is actually part of the digital process. So you can come
use it in
back in
virtual.
via Pro Tools in Virtual Soundcheck and actually make adjustments on it. It's all snapshotable. You can even create events that control those heat elements if you wanted to do it, where maybe a fader, as I turn up a fader past 0, it puts more drive into it, all kinds of things like that. If you
Oh, that's super slick.
yeah.
That's very cool.
That's cool.
And then the other big feature that is exciting to me is the, for lack of a better way of saying it, the wet dry knob on essentially every parameter. So parallel paths for a lot of things.
Yeah. So it's available to every input and output channel. You have the ability to parallel compress, meaning you can have a mix wet dry on every compressor. You have the same ability on a noise gate. So you can, and people get confused with the gate. It's like, why would you ever want to have wet dry on a gate? And I give an example, I think in the Avid webinar that I did last week, talking about like if you had a drum, maybe a snare drum that's very soft in terms of impulse, well, you could set up the gate to be really chippy, right? Where it would be a very short, snappy gate, and then just blend that into the snare drum and get more attack on your snare drum, right? So that's one way to do it. That's common studio workflow. And then the other one is being able to mix wet dry on your equalizer. And this is always another one that kind of baffles people. And I go, wait a minute, why would I want to do wet dry? And it's because it works as a scaler. via the mix knob, I can actually adjust all of the filters at one time in terms of their depth or gain, right? It's almost like a percentage of curve versus a full percentage of curve. And it works, using that on system equalization is just absolutely fantastic, where, when the room's empty, your filters might be a little exaggerated. As people fill up, you just reduce the mix on it a little bit, just pull the whole filter set back in. Works just fantastic.
That's really exciting.
Yeah, it really
Very
is.
cool.
It really is. Especially having that parallel compression component on a mix bus, because that is actually really hard to accomplish in the digital domain, especially in the past where we've needed to do bridge channels and all kinds of things like that to be able to do it.
Right.
But even being able to even do, parallel compression on your master bus,
Right.
well, we can do it now. Just put the compressor on there and mix it up, man. Go for it. It's
Brad
already
Maddox
done.
is going to love that.
Well, I do a webinar next Wednesday on the entire delay compensation thing. And I'm going to cover a lot of those workflows, because the other big thing that we're doing now in this software release is all the bus to bus workflows, like group to group, aux to group, group to aux, any of that is available. So then you can
fantastic.
truly set up, a music bus and then a P bus that is, a parallel compression of it, a true parallel compression of it, and then send that on to a master. And all of that is compensated for. There's no latency penalty for it.
That's fantastic, because I love sending all my instruments to their own group, and then I want to send them all to a band group or a band bus, have a vocal bus, and then send that to the PA.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that in Yamaha, because they won't let you send bus to bus, is I use the stereo A and the stereo B, and then sum those together in a matrix.
Yeah.
But on SSL and other consoles, you have stems and auxes, and they let you get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, we actually
Right,
try to
right.
hold people back from getting in trouble. I mean, there's some really clever programming on S6L now where, like, even if you're going to go group to group,
Yeah.
if you select the group and say, okay, I'm going to send this to another group, you don't actually have that group as an option. It's subtracted from any of the button push options, so that you can't
So you
create.
can't cause a feedback loop
Yeah,
because it's
Right.
not even
It's not even
selectable.
possible. Yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Right.
And if you were to do that in aux, because there is a time where you might want to do that in an aux, right? Where you might want to feed
Yeah.
it back into itself. Then a prompt comes up on the screen and says, okay, I see what you're doing, but just understand you could be creating a feedback loop. So,
That's
Are you sure?
are you really sure you want to do that?
Yeah.
It's like the Pro Tools thing. These will be deleted, gone forever,
Gone forever.
from disk. It's like, are you sure you want to
Yeah.
clear these regions? Yeah.
I mean, some of the other stuff that's coming in that software release are all consoles now have 400 plug-in slots. We kind of took away that tiering of the plug-in slots because it was making it hard to go console to console, but that's just not an issue anymore. Everybody has the same amount of plug-in slots. We have an AVB Milan card that is going to be available for the console now. 128 play or forward and receive. You can set up these huge kind of send and receive networks between consoles. I mean, it's just amazing workflow there. So
That's cool.
yeah.
Speaking of AVB, where is what's the state of the union on the war there between audio protocols?
I've never seen it as a war.
Okay.
It's never been a binary question for me. I've always said, yeah, I'm okay with both of those things. But certainly there are advantages to each. In my windshield, the way it looks, Dante is very accessible. They have tons of product available to you. Use consumer grade switches, all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The place where that falls down for me at times is that it's a dynamic throughput in those devices, right? Where throughput can be a moving target. That's the part that gets scary for me for big system design, for really meaningful system design. And that's where AVB really stands above it in many ways, is that is a fixed throughput. That all of that bandwidth is allocated, reserved. We know what the throughput's going to be regardless of how many channels we add to it, how much pressure we put on the network, So to me, that's the big dividing line. Now we can go into the whole level 2 versus level 3 thing
Sure.
on the internet, et cetera. But again, that's why I just say, I don't want to have either or. I'll take them both. I got
Take 'em both,
applications for both. And
That's
we do that with S6L. We support both. We want to have both of those things there.
I thought that was happening when that Dante card became available. I thought, okay, I think this is just going to be a big, happy ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we certainly want it that way. I mean, that's kind of the driving force behind Milan, is that all the big PA manufacturers are supporting Milan, where it's this AVB kind of branch off protocol to be able to do all of this piping of information to and from their systems. And what is important with information going to these systems? Throughput, right? We don't want system alignment changing as a function of bandwidth. So, they're looking for stability and predictability, determination of throughput there. So they're all on the bandwagon now. L Acoustics there. Everybody else is coming, tons of other people there.
That's great.
And it's all big channel counts. You're going to have some really, really big channel counts there, especially for these big immersive systems. It's going to be really important to do that.
I'm about to ask a question that may require another podcast episode in of itself. But
I'm available.
I think we've done several of those questions already today, because I think some of our listeners are going, "Hey, can you talk more about that? Because you didn't quite get to the bottom of it for me." So,
well, that's me. Just light up a room and leave. That's what I do.
Yeah. Well, let me just tease this. Maybe we talk about it a little, but it will be. It's what do you call it? Opening up a can here. So output, we've been talking a lot about input, but on the output side, what about console output? Like, are they all the same, or are outputs unique as well? And we should be aware of what levels come out of the consoles.
Well, there's a D to A conversion there.
Right.
Is it as critical as A to D conversion? My gut tells me it's not as critical, but I would certainly pay attention to it. I think we get off the hook a little bit with get let off the hook a little bit with output, because we always have enough output level.
Yeah.
That conversion. That output stage never seems to suffer from it.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
I'm less worried about that than I am the capture of the mic pre.
So my next question, as that relates, well, that was a half an episode right there. So that was good. When you're talking or thinking about system design for a tour, say, or an installation, the size of PA, are you thinking about at what level will this PA be running at? So, for example, like putting a K1 system or a D&B GSL in a 4,000 seat room seems like that is way overkill. That PA is going to be running at 25%.
I think there's absolutely credibility to that line of thinking. The right tool for the right job, right? That's my whole mantra in life. I think, you can do anything if you got the right tool.
And I don't necessarily mean overkill in money. Like, take that aside. Just does a PA sound better?
Yeah.
Does a PA sound better running at 80% of its bandwidth?
Ultimately, the question you're asking is there a sweet spot for the PA?
Yeah, exactly. There it is.
Yeah, I'd say there probably is. Although I think we're so much better at that in PA design today than we ever even dreamed of being 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I was certainly gone there with you in the analog crossover to PA days, without question there. But we're so much better with that now. You think about the dynamic range, really clean, incredible dynamic range that is available via the PA system today. It is breathtaking compared to what it used to be. And I take issue with anybody that says, "Oh, PAs don't sound as good as they used to." Baloney.
Oh, that's
baloney.
That's definitely not true.
Baloney. Give me a break. If you believe that, you didn't mix on enough of those old PAs. Let me tell you.
But isn't there, and I may be wrong about this, but isn't there a sort of power ratio from the output signal of your system getting to the amps, getting to the PA, that it seems like there should be a sweet spot? Like if I only drive it at 10% of its capacity, somehow it's just not going to be as robust as it would be if I was at 70%.
If you put in a PA system into a venue and you're driving 10% of it on a regular basis, that's criminal.
Yeah.
It's just criminal.
Yeah.
It's just so incredible poor design. And we really wrestled with this in the early days of line source, where the marketers of the world wanted to say, yes, look how much less PA you can get away with these line source PAs, and it was like, yeah, okay, I get that. But in line source, part of the magic is using more boxes to get pattern control, right? And to get more control, you use more boxes. And more boxes doesn't necessarily give you more amplitude. it just gives you better coverage capability, right? That
Yeah.
is the mindset everybody gets into. But that is just completely at odds with people that are bidding specs, and accepting bids. It's like, well, wait a minute, why do we have all these cabinets? So, there has to be some discipline, I guess is the right word to use there, in terms of the box topology you use. Would I be better off, and forgive me, I'm just going to shoot from the hip here.
Yeah.
Would I be better off with 6 K1s or 12 Caras in the building? I would say more often than not, if it's any kind of geometry in the building, you'd be better off with the 12 Caras.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of the pattern control and coverage and all of those things being better. Yeah. I agree.
You follow me there?
And by better off, you mean sounds better.
Well, would sound better, certainly, because it's going to be more controlled in the environment.
Yeah.
Right? That's the first place to stop. And then on top of it, in terms of just amplitude, et cetera, that it can produce, I'm not as concerned about that. I mean, if you want K1s, go K1s, but I think in terms of just its ability to fit into the geometry, build the right polar to get into the geometry, you're better off with more boxes,
Totally agree. I think that's really what I was after.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there's the complete other end of the spectrum, right? Where you got guys out there who will say, well, really what you need is one good box. It really should just be one box.
Oh, I know some of those guys.
Yeah. I mean, if
I've
you
been
want to
in
look
some
at it in
Facebook
that
fights with
vacuum,
those
okay,
guys.
it's like, well, yeah, phase response. Yeah, in the room, one box. Yeah, that's probably good. Let's talk coverage for a second here.
Yeah. And let's talk what happens when you put them in a football stadium. Sorry.
We're not going to go there.
I'm not going to go there with you.
Okay.
I mean, I
just
love
stepped
those
on a
guys.
soapbox.
And we all know who we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I love those guys and have got a lot of respect for them. But some of that thinking is a little off the rails for me, for music.
That's a good point.
Well, this has been great.
Oh, let's do another hour. Come on. You can run the next hour next month. Come on.
That's probably good. I got a kitchen to go remodel.
You do. I've seen the boxes in the background there.
Yeah, I'm sequestered to my garage, and not because I have COVID, because my house I got 3 classrooms in there and a kitchen torn apart. It's awesome.
Do we need to start a GoFundMe for some food for you or something? I mean,
I
Send some
send Lee food.
little DoorDash.
I make
to
my
the
kids
garage.
hunt for their food, so they can either plant gardens outside or learn how to shoot a bow and arrow. That's how they eat.
There you
be
go.
good.
I know she'd been doing a few hunting trips there. I've been keeping up.
I
on it.
did. Yeah, I did last week.
Nice.
It did not go well, but
for
I was
you
out
or the
there.
deer.
For me, came back empty-handed.
Too hot.
Empty cooler,
Yeah.
I should
Foiled
say.
again.
Yeah. Passed on some immatures, and it was
Good
really
man.
hot. 75 degrees every day. Not good
Ooh.
hunting weather.
That's too hot for hunting, man.
It is.
It's supposed to be
It is.
cold when you're hunting.
But you know what is awesome? Sitting in a tree stand for 50 hours with no phone.
You enjoy that?
During the election week, nonetheless. So it was like perfect. It's like, get me out
Forced
of
to
here.
not pay
Well, you know
attention.
where all the
I
deer
love
were. All
Yeah,
the deer
all the
were sitting
deer.
in front of their TV. I mean, that's why.
Right.
That's why you didn't get any.
Exactly.
it. That's funny. Well, as always, this has been great.
Well, listen, I'll self-promote here
Yeah.
for 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Please do.
Because you guys know that I've been on this bandwagon for years now of talking about latency versus propagation, delay compensation. Next Friday at, I think it's 10 o'clock Mountain Time, I'm going to be doing the full breakdown of this delay compensation model that's in the S6L now. And it's meaty. It's deep and meaty. But if you want to understand what's going on there and see some really, really cool stuff in action, I encourage you to come to that webinar.
And for guys who haven't checked it out yet, the previous labs up to this point have been awesome. So if you're not connected to Robert's YouTube channel, you've got to go and subscribe and get caught up. I mean, each one is a significant chunk of brain power and time, but I guarantee you that it's worth it. I mean, just the ones on gain structure and obviously, delay compensation was already a part of that as well. But there's so many great topics already that it's just a wealth of information that's so solid. I can't recommend it enough.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I'll probably take this delay compensation thing and actually drag it into the lab for one of the sessions and really dig down on it there. Because we really don't have the time to do it in one of the Avid webinars. We only got about 45, 50 minutes to do it there. But it's a topic that you could spend hours on, discussing different ways to do things and see what comes out of the wash.
That's cool. How do people sign up for that? They just go to Avid's website?
I'll tell you what, you can also go to my site and sign up for the lab, because I will be promoting it through my lab emails. So if you want to go to robertscovill.com, sign up for the lab or the back lounge, either one of those will get you the email. I'll get you directed there.
Awesome.
Great.
Guys, thank you. Fantastic catching up with you. It's been too long since I spoke to you.
As always, it's been great, and we'll look forward to doing it again.
Thanks for the invite, fellas.
All right, see ya.
Bye-bye.